My name is Andrew, and I am the designer and aspiring author behind this concept initiatives, Lone and Soul Beginnings, Humble Beginnings, that is since 2015. And this is where the real conversation and the real disclosure of the most important points begin. So this entire postscript shall be divided into 4 dot points, and we shall go to them, each of those in detail. Number 1 is the most obvious. Your mileages may vary. Number 2, each and every budgets and or items listed are only there as cumulative examples, as items that adds up cumulatively to a specified total. Moving on to dot point number 3 is where I'll be discussing upon the actual number of calories, as to how much calories does this budget plan actually produces. So this might be, again, a very important topic, so that you will be able to gain an awareness from a bird's eye view whether or not this is enough for you, or maybe it may not be enough for you and or that of your needs, context, and circumstances. And then lastly, and this is perhaps the biggest elephant in the room, how to handle expired foods and or short-dated foods. And of course, all of these are complex, nuanced discussion in their own right, and absolutely by no means that I'm actually confiding for the fact that this video is be all and end all. Having said all that, let's begin. Is what I mean by way of living, way of life as such, that it is only an outcome of which that I've actually have gone through the processes and those stages of over knowing what I consume through the total number of calories, what sort of foods that actually sits right with me, digestion wise, among a whole slew of things, in which again I'm not going to actually go through what those are, because quite frankly, otherwise it will be far too long. So I'm just going to dumping it down into, it seems simple on the outside, but on a practical level, it is infinitely complex. And that is determining what enough means. Getting to know your own habits. Habits first, bickering second. The very first way is for you to track everything that you consume and everything that you spend on food in general. No matter how inconsequential it is, no matter how small or large of a food intake there is. Track every single thing. Based on experience, is simply a state of living whereby you don't ask for anything more, and certainly you don't ask for anything less. It is an ideal state of awareness whereby you would know exactly that, okay, this number of calories that I've actually consumed very much sustains me from where I am. And of course, this is an exercise. And all of these phases is an exercise in and of itself that takes not just in a matter of days, I'm sorry, but in my case, it is an ongoing self-journaling exercise or self-surveillance exercise that you should get to know your own habits first before you can make changes. And for you to be able to therefore acquaint and to be able to gain a rapport over what enough means to you, as accordingly to your current patterns, lifestyle, and therefore habits. So in any case, I'm just going to dumping it down altogether that those are my summary and conclusions over navigate through and establishing, firstly, a sound and more conscientious and more self-aware way of eating, from which that then translates itself, hopefully, over time, a way of life. And each of the items here are cumulative examples adding up to a suggested total for each category as displayed. So what this means is such that I only provide a series of items that I cycle in between, and as such that I do not buy each and every one of these items consistently from one week to the next. Although once again, some items do need to be replenished on a weekly basis. So let's just briefly talk about non-negotiables, what those are, and how I actually came about into actually, once again, sharing just what I personally believe out of my own circumstances, and perhaps may not be relatable to everyone else over what I think is non-negotiable. So once again, this is going to be a contentious topic, and certainly I have to actually rush this through as much as possible for the sake of time. So what defines food as being non-negotiable? The easiest way for me to actually relate to whether or not a food is non-negotiable or not is by their usage case scenario. E.g., can I actually use this particular food in more than one instances or in more than one context? E.g., in my case, eggs are among the most universal richest when it comes to micronutrient also likewise, and again we're going to get to that criteria of micronutrient density at the moment, but in this case here, can I actually use that food in multiple case scenarios and or usage cases? In this case, yes. If you say yes, then give yourself a tick that this particular food, in my case eggs, is very, very versatile. I can use this in amidst a carbohydrate allowance days and also obviously less carbohydrate allowance days. That is one criteria. And another criteria is, of course, as you may guess, is in terms of micronutrient density, by which that is also, once again, this is where the nuanced debate comes in, and also where the nuanced need for self-experimentation, by which that I refer to as exclusion and re-inclusion protocols comes in. There comes at some stage whereby you will need to exclude certain foods and then also at some stage re-include back those foods and see if there is any change in overall quality of life markers. Subjective, of course, e.g. feelings of well-being, psychology, fitness training, gut sensitivity and your tolerance, and so on and so forth. To simply stay as you are, habits first. Get to know your entire calorie intake, whether or not those things satiate you or not satiate you. Once again, establish and gather yourself enough data as much as possible, consistent enough data to make sure that you have a consistent enough baseline experience likewise. Do that for as long as you can, for at least until you realize, okay, maybe it's time for me to start tinkering myself with individual food exclusion and re-inclusions, and see where I go from there. And that is where perhaps 6 months from now, or perhaps even 1 year from now, this discussion will become inevitable to you. Weekdays, LCIF, from Monday to Fridays, 1,500 calories on the lowish side, into all the way up to 2,500, luxurious or lavish side of a intake, in which of course those things are quite rare, but they do happen from time to time. For as long as I can, of course, save things for more later usages, or all things recycle and reuse as much as possible. So let's break those things down further. A typical meal that is on one meal a day, or technically speaking, 2 meals a day, constricted within those 1 or 2 hour feeding window, would produce around about 900 calories on the low side all the way up to, if I'm actually lucky, depending on the resources availability, up to 1,200 or even 1,500 calories in one sitting, and then followed by the next and last meal, in which that will be where the remaining 800 to 900 calories all takes place. But this once again may not be applicable to anyone who has not had the digestive readiness or digestive adjustments that's required as part of not months but years worth of dietary tinkering and scientific journaling, to name a few. This entire calorific breakdown as a sample also includes the ingestion of post-workout nutrition themselves. What does that mean? It means that my post-workout calories no longer comes from discretionary use of supplements, e.g. whey protein supplements or pea protein supplements. All of that have changed as such that now I'm relying on actual foods themselves to their fullest extent. Those of you who are easily anxious or just plain nosy when it comes to the dieting world, well, here it goes. On the low side, 3,000 calories, and then all the way up to, I would say, uncomfortable, yet still quite rare from time to time, 3,500 calories in a given Saturday or in a given Sunday. So this particular goes on after training, in which I usually just go with, first of all, liquid calories. So that will be full cream milk. And then following from about 30 minutes or 15 minutes afterwards, then comes my very first full featured meal. So this comes across as usually sweet-based recipe as opposed to savory-based recipes like bread or pizzas and whatnot. So in this case here, I personally would just hover around making myself a series of basic cake recipes. Those can be either a basic jam cake recipes, in which those are cake recipes that involve cheap $2 or $3 fruit jam based as a basis of the sweeteners, or slightly elaborate recipes, e.g., quote unquote poor man carrot cake recipe. 1,800 calories for a small batch cake, in which that serves up to 2 or 1.5, depending on how hungry I am, or all the way up to 2,000 to 2,250 calories. So that is for the more elaborate and more, again, luxurious combinations and whatnot with other sweeteners, honey, and the like. Do I indulge myself in this, again, what fitness people actually crave on, e.g. ice creams, pizzas, or takeaways? I usually don't, personally don't actually condone relying on takeaway or ultra-processed foods, per se. Once again, it's their decision, their own consequences. For me, personally, I like to control what I'm eating and to be conscious, therefore, over what I'm actually making, and enjoy with what I can make and produce out of this budget. Beef meats are okay, despite, however, if they're already slightly or moderately discolored, so long as, of course, we are cooking them as thoroughly as we can. Drain the fluids, drain the liquids as much as possible. And for added peace of mind, even though this can be a little bit extreme, as such that you can pour in another boiling water, just a way of, again, just as a peace of mind. I have not been experiencing any serious gastric distress or excessive heartburn or anything of the like. Another thing that I'd like to share when it comes to safer types of meat proteins will be those that are low in fat. Sure enough and safe enough that you can safely take the fats out of the equation of risk altogether. So at least in my case, I have found that chicken mince and followed by ham, at least the leaner variety, are safe to consume beyond their expiry date. Luckily enough as well that I have not had any serious gastric upsets nor any events whatsoever. Of course, you want to ideally consume them in a heated fashion, no more than once or twice in terms of a reheating cycle, and that's it. The lower fat variety here that I'm referring to, chicken that is already cut up or already minced away from their cartilages, bones, and or other gelatinous-based tissues, in my humble opinion, or at least in my experience so far, are what I consider much safer compared to those that are still in their whole food, whole form, e.g. drumsticks, chicken Maryland, thighs, cutlets, and obviously whole chickens. So, in other words, for those whole bird or those uncut varieties, those are what I would consider less safe. I would actually try to assess based on their smell. If the smell is already offensive, I would say that that is precisely the moment whereby, okay, let's just say no. And no, I would actually not try to cook whole chickens, especially if they're short dated whole as it is, cut them. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you get the idea, such that that way you can cook them at a much faster rate, and I would not be keeping any leftover stocks or fluids or liquids from chickens, in this case here, for any longer than a week in the fridge, or even potentially less, because otherwise it will accumulate, the likelihood of triggering higher chances of histamine like releases. Other meat proteins that I sort of have the gray areas are livers pate, including chicken livers, lamb livers, and beef livers, which is again quite a little bit unfortunate given the fact that I still think that they are nutrient dense animal-based proteins that you can ever get. Again, this is just me recalling from what I documented in my very last feature release on the handling of expired food groups surrounding meat proteins. Some sort of, again, just feelings of unease, feelings of as though that I don't digest the meat well, in which that was something to do with the lamb itself. And then next we have chicken gizzards or chicken giblets. And for those of you who do not know, once again, those chicken giblets and gizzards refer to the stomach organs of the bird. So that is unfortunately quite prone to rancidity. And then lastly is the gelatinous cuts of meat, in which that is what I'm referring to as the leg of lamb, pork shoulders, and the like. What makes me ambivalent about this, at least over my own years of consuming these products, is the more often than not presence of vegetable oils, PUFA, and that includes seed oils included. All it comes down to here is, how does it taste? Do you feel comfortable cooking or reheating? There is certainly a difference in taste. That there is a certain sense of a tension, not tension as to the things that I felt as that I feel sick. It's nothing like that, but it is actually subtle feelings of unease whenever I'm actually consuming high amounts, quote unquote. Once again, I shall emphasize very high amounts of this mock-based meat proteins that have 50-50 high protein as well as also high amount of vegetable oils, cottonseed oils, soybean oils, and the like. So once again, whether or not you relate to this or not, it again is entirely dependent to your own circumstances. It may not apply to you, and I hope not. Once again, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from actually buying these meat mock proteins if they so are actually put onto sale. So once again, it's all to do with economics. I completely agree on the plant-based side of things, on the plant-based crowd, that is. However, in terms of taste, in terms of palatability, do you feel safe by consuming them? In my humble opinion, this is where this type of category of meat proteins should be warranted with caution, especially if you plan to rely on consuming these over and over and over again. So now let's talk about how to actually properly and shall I would say personally, respectfully discard meat. Let's actually talk about what I would personally do not do. That is to just tip it out into your garbage bin. Please do not do that. Because after all, if there is at least 2 or 3 days, this is where you have to keep the meat products within the freezer. I would actually not put it in the refrigeration, because otherwise the refrigeration is not cold enough to the point whereby it would stop all the smell from radiating apart, from continuing to radiating apart. That is. So I would personally keep them in the freezer for as long as however number of days needed the night before the bin collection. Please make sure that you actually put them into a biodegradable plastic bag, and away you go. Wheel it for collection in the morning. If we can picture how much of a mass of uneaten food waste there is already, that is contributing to our landfill. I need not go any further than that, than to say that, then for you to pretty much make an introspective comparison of scenarios. Is it better for the environment, or at least for nature, to reclaim its process as soon as possible versus as slow as possible? Arguably, I feel that it is better to actually cook the meat that you are planning to discard, knowing that it is faster for nature's own processes, the natural process of decomposition, rancidity, and whatnot, once it arrives at the landfill, rather than delaying the whole process. I'll leave that up to you to decide, but I've already shared with you all what I would personally do, and what I would personally believe as such, that nature should reclaim itself in the fastest possible manner. I would like to thank you all, for we have now reached to the end of this POSTSCRIPT presentation. There are many things that I was planning to include in this video. However, due to time limitations, work gets in the way, life gets in the way. Unfortunately, this is as best as I can actually deliver my content that is distinctly different, that I do not post things frequently for the sake of frequency, but rather for the sake of sincerity. Sincerity that is from a retrospective lens, rather than providing information as they happen or as they arrive, in which again, I am not trying to compete within that type of formatting. Let's just hereby move on to my next concluding statements. I sincerely thank you once again. My well wishes remain to one and all, and of all things, live it forward. And I'll see you in the next feature presentation. And until then, take care for now.